And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bashing us, him.
All right, we're live, baby.
Live. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's 8:05 Eastern time, but for Pacific time, 5:05. Good morning, bright and early. Matthew O'Brien, Hassan, thank you. We're going to have Patrick Jordan on today. Listen, Eric Adams, man, every day we could have something to talk about when it comes to Eric Adams. It's funny, you and I were talking yesterday offline, and I was saying to you, I was like, you know what, John? It's been a while, right? I mean, the FBI took his phones. It's been a while. What do you think's going to happen? Boom. Later on, he texted me like he got succeeded. So, what are your thoughts? You're going to miss Eric Adams?
I mean, I'm not sure he's gone yet. I'm not sure he's gone just yet. But, you know, he got subpoenaed over corruption and a corruption federal grand jury that they're looking into Turkey giving him campaign funds. I also heard through the grapevine that he took in a lot of illegal campaign donations. And traditionally this happens. And then the person who's running will always claim, oh, I didn't know anything about it. So what they'll do is they'll take in all these campaign funds, you know, and they'll have everyone send them donations that are over the limit, donations that aren't allowed because it's friends, people that do business with the city, their family members, all of these crazy things will happen. So what they'll traditionally do, politicians, is then say, oh, okay, well, we did an audit and we're giving the money back. But in New York, there's something called matching funds. And you'll notice that politicians in New York, and on both sides of the aisle, they go nuts around matching funds. Send me donations for whatever, and then what if I donate 500 to them, they'll get another 500 on top of it. Or sometimes it's 2-to-1, things of that nature. So what happened is most of those illegal donations came in during the matching funds time. So New York City taxpayers funded these matching illegal donations. So when he got caught with his hands in the cookie jar, he just returned the illegal donations, right? And so we got that coming in. We got money coming in from a foreign government. We have his police commissioner taking money from a foreign government going over. So, I mean, the thing that stands out to me with the whole subpoena is that there really wasn't political pressure to indict him. So it's not like you hear people saying, oh, my God, look at this guy. His son's running marijuana shops and he's closing down all the marijuana shops in New York City because he wants to prop his business up. And his corrupt buddy that's next to him that he made the deputy mayor or whatever. And so it's not like it's coming in that way. And they're saying, all right, indict this guy, indict this guy, indict this guy. It's coming in from out of nowhere. So I think it definitely has legs.
So, I mean, we were speaking about it. I said, it's odd that it's taken so long. And we don't hear any political pressure from his opponents either. I mean, we think at this point that Brad Lander, he wants to get into the Democratic primary. We haven't heard anything from Brad Lander when it comes to it. We haven't heard anything from lately when it comes to his potential corruption with this money scandal, even for Curtis Lewa. So you're right. There is no political pressure on it, but it's quite interesting. It is interesting, the timing, though. I mean, here we are. We are getting close to the elections at this point. So what is the ploy here? I don't know. But I could tell you, listen, if it walks like a duck, probably is a duck. And that's what we see. Everything that's circled around Eric Adams has to do with money. I mean, we even heard rumors numerous times about Timothy Pearson wanting to get his crumbs. Everything that listen, the bottom line is we see it. We just don't have the proof at this point, the actual evidence. And that's a great point. It's just the actual semantics that are played with the funds, the matching funds. It's so interesting about New York City when it comes to these matching funds. I think you and I were just talking about on a recent podcast. We were just talking about that with the matching funds. But that's definitely what's going on. By the way, it's hysterical what somebody said about my stalling. Someone said get a refund with my stalling. But anyway, that's hilarious. So good morning. Let's get right into the article. And let's hit it, John.
Sure. Before we do, Greco wants to know if Eric Adams is headed to Concha Fritos this weekend one last time for the closing party. I'm not sure, Sal. I don't know, brother. I don't know. I don't think he was looking a little down at the press conference the other day. And you know what's funny? My friend, who's not really politically involved at all, he could give two shits. he texted me and he goes, "Wow, you watching this press conference?" I said, "Yeah, I'm watching it." And he goes, "He doesn't look right. He doesn't seem like his usual boisterous self." And I was like, "I don't know. You know, we all been saying it for a while. You've been saying it for a long time, Sal. You know, it's coming down, and let's see what happens. You know, I want to see what happens." So here it comes out. New York Post. Mayor Eric Adams was slapped with a grand jury subpoena by federal prosecutors digging into his 2021 campaign fundraising, law enforcement sources confirmed Thursday. So he got slapped in July. So he's been sitting with this for a little while. It just came out. Adams, City Hall, and his election committee were all handed subpoenas in July as part of months-long probe. Now, if you remember, if you go back a few months, what happened was Eric Adams leaving City Hall with his iPad and his cell phone in his hand, and bam, the feds swarm his car, and they literally say, "How you doing, Mr. Mayor?" Take his phone and his iPad. Not something that happens often. 3 subpoenas are seeking text messages, documents, and other communications and materials, sources said. A lawyer representing Adams, who's 63, and the campaign confirmed the latest legal maneuver and said his owner has done nothing illegal. I got to give Adams credit. He looks good for 63. He's keeping in shape. He had an easy police career, so you gotta think that's part of the reason he looks so young. Is he really?
It must be that plant-based diet.
Well, I mean, he's eating steak every night, so I don't know. It's definitely the meat he's eating, and he's eating all types of meat too.
Oh my God!
Attorney Brendan McGuire said that since the feds launched their probe 9 months ago, the campaign has conducted its own investigation of the areas we understand the U.S. Attorney's Office has been reviewing. The campaign's internal investigation includes combing over campaign documents, tens of thousands of electronic communications, and witness interviews, he said. To be clear, we have not identified any evidence of illegal conduct by the mayor. So his lawyer's doing his own investigation, and he hasn't found any evidence of misconduct. What do you think about that, Eric?
That's very fitting. It sounds like the NYPD with the internal affairs, how they do their own investigations when it comes to the police department, police commissioner Ed Caban and Kaz Daughtry and John Shell. Sort of like the complaint that we made, you know. They're doing their own internal investigation. They haven't found anything. I guess when you're not looking for it, you can't find it. Or, you know, if they're playing hide and seek and they're putting things away. The bottom line is we don't have the evidence right now, but we see it. We see it. I mean, this administration is just riddled with high levels of corruption. The connections that they have with the police department, private entities, everything that surrounds this administration just has a blatant appearance of impropriety. And that's even sometimes that's just even worse when you're walking around that appearance of impropriety. And I think that's a great assessment. He hasn't looked good this past summer. And I mean, listen, it's starting to add up. Sure enough, they served in July, and we're first hearing about it now. But it's it. Why this first crack at this point? It's quite interesting. Donald Cannon put that's pretty funny. Haha. Sound just like we investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong. Sounds familiar. And Sal, good morning, brother. Talking about is he headed to Casa Fritos? Sure enough, I think Casa Fritos will reopen under a different name at a different location. That has been the history of the Jimmy Rodriguez, the owner of Casa Fritos. I mean, he's been part of numerous restaurants and bars. But what's interesting about that is the politicians continuously go to his restaurants. Anywhere that he opens up and closes down, we see the politicians follow suit. And sure enough, especially with this administration but even worse, we see the NYPD go to these restaurants and we just see the hypocrisy. It's interesting that Sal's on here. Good morning, brother. The hypocrisy, how Sal was wrongfully terminated, and yet the NYPD continuously associates and has their cohorts that have mob ties and different criminal elements. It's just it's insane. Donald Cannon, buddy. You guys like ESPN for New York City News. I'm loving it. Outstanding. Thank you for the support, brother. Let's get further into this article. Unless I'm sure you got a comment here, John.
No, yeah. So the thing is that, Eric Adams continuously says where there's smoke, there isn't always fire. And that was an old saying that former chief of IAB used to say, former chief of IAB, Charles Campese, used to say, where there's smoke, there's fire. And that was like anything around you, you're going to find corruption. But Eric Adams says, well, there's smoke, there's not always fire. And I kind of agree with Eric Adams on that. But under his administration, there's smoke, over every agency. In every agency appointment, there's smoke over all their heads. New York City is covered in plumes of smoke. So I'm saying right now, this is just one fire. There's fire here, but it's just one fire. And I don't know if you guys remember that when he was Brooklyn Borough president, he actually did a commercial. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I think it was a movie. He was in a movie, a Turkish movie, where they were bribing an elected official in America, and he played the elected official who they were bribing. So it's really like all of this foreign money coming into New York City. I'm saying right now, I don't think this has anything to do. Everyone goes on the conspiracy theory. It's because he spoke out about the border. He is the poster child for the DNC for bringing illegal immigrants into the country. So I think you guys are out of your mind for thinking that. He calls himself the Biden of Brooklyn. He was the first one to come out and endorse Harris as soon as the switch was made. He went from he was riding with Joe to he was supporting Harris within minutes. I mean, the dude is the poster child for the DNC. I mean, don't forget he was a Republican at one time. So he's a chameleon. He'll be anybody. He'll say anything. He'll do anything. Let's just finish up this article, and then we're going to get Chief Patrick Jordan in on here. To the contrary, we have identified extensive evidence undermining the reported theories of federal prosecution as to the mayor, which have voluntarily shared with the U.S. attorney. McGuire said the campaign continues to cooperate with feds and are in the process of responding to the recently issued subpoena. We continue to look forward to a prompt resolution to this investigation. The subpoenas come 1 month after the sources told the Post that in June, a grand jury was reviewing evidence in the corruption probe. Adams said the day after the report was published that he had no idea the grand jury had convened. The inquiry began in November when prosecutors started looking into the allegations of Turkish government illegally sending money into the mayor's campaign. The probe looked into the business class upgrades that Adams received on his Turkish Airlines. Does anyone think that Ed Kaban received any business class upgrades when he went over to Qatar? It's also exploring. Do you think so, Eric?
No.
Any free coffee on that flight?
Hey, free coffee is the gateway to corruption, brother.
It's the gateway.
You go on a flight. As long as you don't get free coffee on that flight, you're good.
You go from 1 cup of free coffee to robbing old women who were just burglarized. That's what happens. That's the NYPD motto. It also exploring how Adams helped fast-track the opening of the Turkish government's new diplomatic headquarters in Manhattan, sources previously told the Post. Adams acknowledged last year he assisted, but he made clear that was nothing nefarious and simply what elected officials do for constituents. At least 3 people connected to Adams have had their home raided by federal agents, and Adams had his electronic devices seized as part of this investigation. Emails to federal officials were not returned on Thursday evening. All right, let's wrap it up. What's your thoughts, Eric? What do you think? You think he's going to get indicted? You think what's going to happen here?
I do. I think he's going to get indicted. I think this is actually a weak response by him and his lawyer. Because if absolutely you didn't do anything wrong, he would be, especially Eric Adams. We know that Eric Adams likes to be extremely vocal. He likes to express that he's the king, that the public serves him. He doesn't serve the public. If absolutely 1,000% he was innocent, he would be. You would hear him at the top of the mountain. Thank God Eric Adams is your mayor. You pray every day. He's not saying that right now. He would say, I absolutely did nothing wrong. This is a sham. You're right. They're coming after me because I'm black. We would hear the race card. But this is coming.
That's coming, dude.
That's coming too, I'm sure.
He's going to say it today at the press conference. Today. It's coming out today.
I think this is
I got money on it. I'm betting anybody here, Adams pulls the race card at the press conference today.
Oh, I know you're right. I know it's definitely coming because that's the only card that he pulls. But I think that this is a very meek response. This is a meek response from him and his lawyer. I think that's an indication because we know Eric Adams. Well, I mean, then again, do we really know him? We don't know what he's for or against, but we know he's a chameleon. We know he loves to gaslight the public, and we know that when he's in a position of power, he likes to flaunt it. So this is a meek response from Eric Adams and his team, and to me that's a reflection. That's indicative that there's a sign of guilt here, and I think this is going to play out. I do. If I was a betting man, Ryan, I think he's going to get indicted.
Ron Layson says Eric Adams tell you the smoke is just a Canadian wildfires. And then people saying, "Oh, be careful what you wish for." Listen, I don't wish for nothing. I just wish that New York didn't have a corrupt mayor. And unfortunately, it looks like that not only are we talking about illegal donations, there's a lot more behind the scenes that the feds aren't looking at right now that they should be. So if Jumaane Williams gets appointed and there's a special election, you don't know who's going to be the mayor. You have no idea. It could be Curtis Lewa, it could be Eric Dim, it could be John McCarr. You have no idea. It could be Joanne Alariola. Believe me, people are gearing up. And by all means, I keep hearing Cuomo's going to throw his name in the hat. And I don't love Cuomo, but New Yorkers, especially older ones, especially the ones that consistently vote, they do for whatever reason. And Eric Adams got a big problem if Cuomo throws his name in the hat. But so we'll see.
I don't get that comment, honestly. Be careful what you wish for. I don't think at any point that we said, "Hey, I wish he gets indicted." We don't. Honestly. We don't really talk about him on a personal level. We talk about his connection to New York City, his job as a mayor. And some of the stuff that we talk about when it's personalized is actually it's how he does his business. It's how he carries himself as a New York City mayor. It's how he's serving the public. Listen, if he was doing well, John and I would be employed by the New York City Police Department. If he was actually being the mayor that he should be, especially with his experience, especially the fact that he was a captain who should understand law enforcement, who should understand how donations and campaigns work, someone that should be free of corruption. So we don't wish him. Me personally, John, I know we both listen. We think he's a complete moron. We think he's ineffective, inept. He's absolutely should not be the mayor of New York City. I think he's terrible. Somebody put, I agree, he's a terrible mayor. He absolutely is a terrible mayor. We don't wish him. I don't wish him anything. I don't wish him death. I don't wish him injury. I don't wish him to be imprisoned, but I wish him to be better. I do believe he should be held accountable because he's supposed to serve the public. And right now he has created complete chaos for New York City with the illegal aliens, with the taxpayer funds that is costing New York City, the New York City resident, for sustaining this illegal alien crisis, the crime sprees, the gaslighting to the public. He has to be held accountable for those things, this political crisis. Now, as far as if he's actually taking funds and it's illegal, he should be held accountable for that too, because we would be held accountable, and he has to be held on the same playing field. And especially when you're in a position of leadership, you're supposed to set the example. And so make no mistake about it. When you're the mayor, you're supposed to set the example because you are the leader and you're leading the New York City Police Department. And we see how it's trickled down to the police department, the level of corruption, the nepotism, the inept and inadequate police department that we're seeing right now, the protests, the riots that are happening day in and day out. We could go layer to layer just to see how he's an ineffective mayor. But not only that is he ineffective, his actions have caused numerous problematic issues that New York City didn't have before Mayor Eric Adams. And I think that's the key. Ask yourself where we were at before Mayor Eric Adams and where we are now. Now, I'm not saying Bill de Blasio was the best mayor. I don't want Bill de Blasio either.
We were better off under the communist Bill de Blasio, the campaign communist.
But that's my point. Exactly. Were you better off then than you are now?
100%. Yo, shout out to Crazy 107, donated $20 to the channel. He says, "You'll know it's serious when Banks, who's now the deputy mayor of public safety, his prior title was unindicted co-conspirator, jump ship. Proffer subjects have a long probation periods that go years beyond the conclusion of the case. He can't afford to get caught up in Adam's shenanigans. Good job, boys." Yo, Crazy 107, thanks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, listen, we're going to switch topics now. We're going to go on something else. But before we do, I'm bringing up to the stage chief from the largest, former retired chief from the largest sheriff's department in the country, LA County Sheriff's Department. I'd like to welcome to the stage Chief Patrick Jordan. Chief, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure to be on your show the other day as well. We appreciate it.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me on your show.
Hey, Chief, good morning. It's been a pleasure. I mean, we had a great conversation. I was even telling John, it's too bad it was only an hour. It was, it's a hard out on the hour for your show. But I was like, this is a conversation that was just unfinished, and we got more to talk about. And we love your style. You're not dressing up any information. You're giving it as it is. And listen, like I said, East meets West. We found someone on the opposite side of the coast that is in line with our ideology and speaking the truth. Thank you.
And Chief, we stay on here a while, so if you anytime you got to run, feel free. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
We go. We have a long coffee. You know, this is just coffee hour with the boys. But if you could just do us a favor, introduce yourself to the audience, tell everybody who you are, you know, and what you've been pursuing now in retirement.
But before you do that, if you get a cup of coffee, that may lead to corruption. Just want to let you know that.
Well, first of all, I heard you talking about, hey, it's good to see the old guys coming on and saying something finally. I took a little offense with that, okay?
We weren't saying you were old, Chief. We weren't. I have a grandkid. Yeah.
I'm probably old enough to be your dad's, but, you know, okay, we don't have to go there, right? You know, so, okay, so I retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I started my career in 1983. Brief time in custody, then went to patrol, spent a long time in patrol, went back to custody as an executive, and then finished my career as a chief for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I did pretty much everything you can do on a large municipal agency. And just to clarify, I think we're either the second or third largest municipal agency in the country. We have 18,000 employees. And my last gig was, if I had to, it probably akin to a bureau chief, I guess, for you guys. I had 700,000 residents I was responsible for, about 1,200 employees, both sworn and professional staff. And I retired in 2021, so 38 years if you do the math. And I did mostly street work. And then as you go through the ranks, of course, you'd like to think you oversee street work. You're not really doing street work. I think you really stop at lieutenant. And once you get past lieutenant, you're done really doing street work. You can play at street work as a lieutenant, as you guys probably figured out. But once you get past that, you just kind of show up for the press conference and think you're still one of them, right? You know. But so I did 38 years. I retired in 2021, and like I said, I'd lived, as we talked on my show, I lived through the high crimes of the 80s and 90s. I experienced the embracing of community policing via the broken windows theory. I watched as crime dropped. I watched as the politicians set expectation of law enforcement, dictating to us that we want you to do more. We want you to put people in jail. I was there when leaders, Democratic leaders, Black leaders, demanded that we do something about the crack epidemic, passed the laws that we enforced. And I was there when they turned their back on us and said that it was all a racist plot. I experienced all of that within my career. I saw it, I heard it, and I was offended towards the end of my career that our political class would so callously throw the men and women in law enforcement under the bus after they've asked us to do this hard work to lower crime, which we did. When I started my career, NYPD was running between, I think, 2,500 and 3,500 murders a year. I think LA was doing about 6. LA County Sheriff's Department was probably about 5, our county areas. And just to clarify for folks, we right now, the Sheriff's Department does policing for about 3.5 million people because we do contracted law enforcement. LA City is about 4 million people. And then the rest of the cities and the county police the rest of the population. And it's somewhere about 11, 12 million people. And so I started doing my podcast just because I was so offended by the betrayal and the misinformation coming out. So when you hear me talk, I've usually well-researched. I research the issue, I talk about it, and I clarify what actually really happened because that was my lived experience, right? You know, you heard these leftists talk. You know, their lived experience is their truth, right? So that's my lived experience. Not only is it my truth, but it is the truth. And that's why I started my show, Briefing with the Chief, on KGRADB.com. And just to clarify, my show broadcasts on Rumble every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's an hour-long show. I analyze news, public policy, and and crime, criminal stuff, but whatever else the chief wants to talk about, right? But it also simulcasts over an online radio platform called KGRADB.com. So I hit a fairly large audience, probably, I've been told somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people over both platforms. And so I'm excited. I started my show in December and it's picking up steam. And I was glad to have you guys on because reaching out to other podcasters who are trying to share the truth, particularly in law enforcement, is critical.
Got a great comment here. One of our supporters here, his name is Hassan. Hassan said, 38 years, you know this guy is intelligent, wisdom for sure. And they hear it, and they see it. And listen, I'm not trying to insult you, but it's the truth. I've been asking, if you watch a podcast, Chief, I've been asking for 2 years now, where is that old white guy in the New York City Police Department that is a chief, that is appointed management, is in leadership, that has the ability to manage up, to actually speak to the mayor and actually stand up for the rank and file, because the rank and file has been politicized, and actually stand up against the machine. And you are that guy. Unfortunately, we had to find you on the opposite side of the coast because you speak the truth. And they window dress everything, just as you said yesterday in your comment. That's exactly what they're doing, because they're pretending. They're playing pretend. You said that some of them go out and play. And we see that from the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information, the Deputy Commissioner of Operations. They're going out and they're playing. They're raising the flag at Columbia University. They're going out in emergency services, SWAT gear, when they're doing a press conference. They're playing pretend. They're gaslighting the public. And ultimately, they're pretending to themselves, because at night they have to lay down. They have to look up at the ceiling and ask themselves, did I tell the truth today? Did I live a day of another lie? And I do believe, they'll never admit it to the public, I do believe if there is some good left in this administration, or any administration when it comes to leadership, that it has to be eating them alive. It has to be. And I do believe at some point it's going to haunt them.
Yeah, I think if you've done 3 or 4 decades in law enforcement, now you're in the senior management thing. It's for some degree they're at the end of their career and they just want to get across that finish line and get their retirement, right? So they're willing to do what they have to do that. But I in a little bit in their defense, I do want to say, if you look at the lawfare that's going on in New York in particular, around the country. I can understand where they might be concerned and they might have just a little bit of fear. And because, you can use the administrative process against anybody you want, in law enforcement, and you can use the criminal process against anyone. We're seeing that, particularly in New York, certainly at the national level with Trump and others. So they are being compelled to go down a certain path. Now, the Central Park thing, I thought about that, and there's really 2 issues yesterday on your show where this guy, he's doing a bit of a dog and pony show, and to some degree that can be valuable if there's actually meat in the operation. Because I've done dog and pony shows, but
You're talking about Central Park?
Yeah, it's on the heels of actually doing real good, solid police work that I'm talking about, right? And then you want to spread the word to the criminals who are doing it, so they could see pictures of people in handcuffs, right? I mean, mine always was at the result of I would send 300 guys out. Well, this was when I was the chief of transit. We did probation sweeps for taggers, believe it or not. It was incredibly successful, and we partnered with LAPD and other agencies. My unit ran it, and we would cover 1,000 square miles, and we would hit like 300 locations, and we'd have 70, 80 arrests, and they'd be all lined up. So I had meat to show. I had a story to tell that was effective, and one of the reasons why I did the dog pony show is I wanted all the other taggers to know I'm coming for you, right? So if you have meat so there is some value to doing a public thing, but it's usually on the cusp of finishing something, right? You got results and you're showing those results, and that's the part that's where I have that's why I said this is theater right now, because I would much rather do it and then talk about it instead of just have the big. Does that make sense to you guys? So there is some value.
You're saying you'd rather put the horse before the cart, and they're putting the cart before the horse, and that's what we're saying. That's what we said yesterday. We said we don't have a problem with them informing the public, but first we would have took care of the issue. We're not really taking care of the issue here. This is smoke and mirrors. We're flooding Central Park with an unsustainable plan. We're not going to take 100 officers off New York City street. And at the same time, that night, we showed what happened at the Kamala Harris event, that New York City mayor hosts an event for Kamala Harris, and he can't even keep that event under control in his own city. Right. And this is on the heels of the DNC. This is on the heels of the DNC in Chicago. And, as much as I could knock Eric Adams, I think he's the worst mayor New York City ever had. But I don't even think he comes anywhere close to Brandon Johnson. So I don't know what's in store next week for Chicago. But from the outside looking in, right? You're in LA, right? You're very focused in LA. That we were on your show. You are basically mirror what we do here. You look at all the policy and the legislation coming out. You hone in. You name the names of the people that are pushing the policy. what are you seeing in New York, and what are your thoughts on New York from your view?
Okay, well, I have to back up here a little bit, and I do focus probably 50% of my show on LA or California-based issues, but I've reached out because my show does go international, and the radio portion, and most of my audience is national. So I do focus in Texas, Illinois, and New York as best I can, because I'm digging up information. But let me tell you something else that I do that has given me a lot more insight in New York than what has gone on in New York, let's say for the last 50 years, is I do another show. It's called Morning Coffee with the Chief, and I actually evaluate crime-related movies. It's a lot more fun. It started out more serious because I needed an outlet for my politics, and then they gave me another show, and I have an outlet for my politics. So now I really just talk about the movies. But I have done so many movies on New York and what was happening in New York in the 60s and 70s, and I brought on former NYPD people and former residents of New York to talk about it. And I'll give you one: Fort Apache to Bronx. Another one, the French Connection. I just did that on this other platform called Pop Culture Minefield, Morning Coffee with the Chief. And I did the 7-Ups. And when you look at, because they were actually filming on the streets of New York, and you saw the urban decay at the time. Because remember, you guys came out of the 60s into the 70s, and New York was on its knees. It was almost bankrupt, and they weren't funding a lot of the municipal resources that they should have at the time. And you saw that. You saw gangs, you saw all that stuff. That's why you had this huge spike in murders and everything else. And partly it was bad policies, partly it was you just didn't have the money to do the right thing back then because of corruption and bad municipal management. And you can look back at cultural references that came out of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s regarding New York, and you can actually see that, right? So, I mean, you probably are surprised that I'm talking about it this way, that I have this other, but that's my knowledge and it came from a guy named Vic Farrar. That's his nom de guerre. He writes, Vic, right? I had a captain from the NYPD Narcotics Bureau on. He was retired. I can't remember his name now. And I had a couple of the New Yorkers on, and when we go over these movies, they say, yeah, that's what it was like. That's what was happening. I had a couple of New Yorkers on the NY and the sheriff's department out here who grew up in the 60s and 70s and says, yes, that's what it was like. And so my question is, why are we going back to that in New York? Because that's where you're going. You went from that 3,000 murders a year to I think your lowest, you're at 250 to 300 murders. And now you're creeping back up. And the question is, why are we doing that in New York? That's because everybody looks to New York. You guys, you went from really high crime and you brought it down, and now you're heading back up. So why do the policymakers, why are they doing this? Why do they want to do it? And I mean, I have the answers. I have my own thoughts about why they're doing it. But New Yorkers need to ask that question. And they need to talk to the old guys, older than me, who said, this is what it was like. This is where we went to. Why are we going in this other direction?
Well, I think it's become so progressive that it's actually regressive. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because everything you said is indicative that we went full circle and we went back to the 70s. Instead of doing a 180 moving forward, we actually did a 360, went back to it. And it mirrors what you're saying when you talk about the city at that time in the 70s was bankrupt, and they actually had to lay police officers off from the police department that really affected crime at the height of the 70s. But we're at the same point. We're on the brink of financial disaster in New York City because businesses are escaping New York City. No one wants to do business in New York City anymore. And the taxpayer is on the brink of their heels right now because of this illegal alien crisis. And yet we're still funding this illegal alien crisis even further. And these are just additives and more of a contribution to the crime level in New York City. Now, you had mentioned something I thought was great. You said that you would put the same personnel out in Central Park, and you would do these mobilizations and do sweeps. That's a key word that you just said. You would do sweeps, and sweeps are effective. Sometimes you storm a location with extreme amount of personnel, and you do sweeps because they're purposeful and they have significance to make arrests, to get information, to stop a particular spree that's happening. But that's not what's happening with the New York City Police Department. And I think that you're trying to show some similarities, which I understand, but I think your dog and pony show was purposeful. when it comes to the New York City Police Department, the upper echelon, they're just putting this presence out just to gaslight the public and give the perception that we're actually doing these sweeps, but they're not doing sweeps. And they've actually testified to the New York City Council that they're not doing sweeps because approximately 97% of the evaders in the transit system are not being first in search. And they're given what's called a civil summons, an old summons, which means they're not really held accountable for it. There's not going to be a warrant. And they're right back on the train. So there's even no point to even pay it. You'll just constantly get these civil summonses that hold no weight to it. So, with that being said, if you were in the position of the upper echelon of the New York City Police Department now, let's say you're the chief of patrol, the chief of department, you're a uniformed service, but obviously you fall under these progressive politics. I speak about this ability to, when you lead, to manage the people below you, but also manage the people above you. So in their position, obviously out of fear, how would you manage the mayor or the leadership above you to help the rank and file and to actually help the public under this progressive movement and under these politics?
Well, as you guys have heard me, I'm very tactful in how I talk. I'll be blunt, but so you have to hone that skill where you can be frank about the issues because they know the issues. They just don't want to address them. But it's tough when you're managing a bunch of people and they're under threat, meaning this is your rank and file staff. You can't necessarily advocate for aggressive stuff that's going to get them in trouble. Do you follow me? I can't say let's go out and storm this area because internal affairs and all the leftists will come out and target them. You're at a high level, so you might just retire if it gets too hot. So you have to balance. You get away with what you can get away with if you're a good administrator. So I'll look at for example, they said, okay, I was the chief of the LA Metro here in Los Angeles for about 3 years, and so when they say get rid of fares, okay, well then I'm going to switch to another low-level violation or multiple ones that I can focus on to clean up the system, and I'm going to enforce habitual fare evasion. I'm going to find out a strategy to do that. Now that's within the lanes that they said I can operate in. They don't want me to do that, but that's what I'm going to do, and I will talk frankly about that. And to be quite frank, once you develop a strategy that I'm just looking for a strategy that works, and I'm going to sell the strategy and I'm going to push the strategy. And I'll do it in a positive way as best I can, because even though I might want to support the guys and be, hey, we're going to do it, we're going to do this, I don't care what they say. I can't do that because I'm not going to pay the price for pushing them to go beyond the boundaries that are acceptable in the city at the time. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So you have to speak the truth to the top, but you also have to understand the realities of what you're going to ask your guys to do and not push them into those gray areas, because you just don't want, you want to get there. Your job is to help do a good job, make sure they get across the finish line to retirement.
I absolutely know what you're talking about. I was in the Marine Corps. I went to officer candidate school. I was actually honor grad, and they would talk about that. That's one of the leadership qualities that they would talk about. Is they would call it tipping the scales, right? That you have to almost be in the middle of the balance beam, right? You manage the people below you and also manage the people above you. That there's an art to leadership that's not only your subordinates, but it's actually leading your leaders. And even Jocko Willink talks about this on his podcast, that you win when you support your leadership. At the same time, you're standing up for your beliefs. So especially in this climate right now, and I agree, it has to be balance. But
right.
And we don't see balance from this administration. We just see pandering in one direction, and it's just, okay, boss, no problem. But they're not standing up for their beliefs, at the same time balancing the scales. And I appreciate that. You're absolutely right.
So Chief, if you look up on the screen here, I showed squeegee men have returned to New York City, right?
Crazy.
Something we haven't seen since the early 90s, mid 90s,
Yeah.
And now what you're seeing here is you're seeing a group of people, young kids, one 11, one 17, and one who is unapprehended. And what they did, they committed a violent robbery on someone on New York City trains. So the 11-year-old was apprehended. The 17-year-old was apprehended. The third party, we don't know how old he is, but he's outstanding. The NYPD arrest these individuals. They find them at the migrant shelter because they came here illegally. They're being taught they're of Venezuelan descent. From all likely, they have ties to Tren de Aragua. And the NYPD issues both the 11-year-old and the 17-year-old what's known as a juvenile report. And what a juvenile report traditionally was used for in the NYPD was truancy, right? When I used to get caught sneaking out of high school,
Yeah.
the cops would grab me and bring me back, and they would give me a juvenile report, and it would stay in the precinct file cabinet. It would get thrown out at the end of the year and expunged, right? It was, and this is what we're releasing violent robberies on. Like, what's your thoughts on this scenario?
Well, a couple of things. One, we had this similar process, and we used juvenile information forms. So we had a similar process when I first started on the LA County Sheriff's Department, and those are valuable in a way because it required you also to call the parents and talk to the parents, and so if there was an effort to engage the kid to get him on the right path, you did it. That's what the first step was. But when you're committing violent crimes, this whole movement, this progressive prosecutor movement, is really impacting everybody. And I am planning on doing a show, and I let me give you guys a little bit of. There's an organization called the Fair and Just Prosecution Organization. I don't know if you're aware of it. It is run by a gal named Miriam Krinsky. It's funded by George Soros. So his organization gives money to an organization called Trend Center, which then gives money to all these progressive prosecutors. Now, 3 or 4 shows ago, I interviewed the DA from Harris County, Texas, Kim Ogg. She was funded by Soros. She was a progressive prosecutor. She is a progressive, but she's also spent a lot of time as a career prosecutor. And so she got elected, I think it was 2 terms ago, and she embraced some aspects of the progressive prosecutor movement. She was invited to join this organization funded by Soros, but she didn't believe in zero bail. She believed that we might need to modify the bail system, but I don't believe in zero bail, which is what we're getting to right here. And she said, and also I want more money because I actually do want to prosecute some of these criminals. And she got a call from the head of this organization. And this was a long explanation of why I'm getting here, right? She got a call from the head of this organization and said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And she said, "Well, I'm short staffed. I need people to prosecute the real criminals here in Houston and Harris County, Texas." And they primaried her. She just lost her race. They gave her opponent, a much more progressive prosecutor, $4 million. Soros did. So the Fair and Just Prosecution Organization ends up being the enforcement arm of George Soros. I found out in that interview that, you remember the toughest sheriff alive, Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County?
Yep.
Well, he had a tiff with George Gascon, who he was on the advisory board till recently. And once I did a show on this, they took his off the advisory board. So I think I'm having an impact of this Fair and Just Prosecution Organization. And Gascon had a problem with him. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, brought Gascon up to San Francisco and then made him the DA up there. Then he became the DA in LA. But they took out Joe Arpaio as well. First, they went after him for federal prosecution, misdemeanors. Then they primaried him, and they gave his opponent $4 million. George Soros did. So when we talk about expectations of executives, keep in mind there are a lot of people behind the scenes that are suppressing anybody who steps out of line. I was unaware that they were the ones who took out, with the Obama administration, the toughest sheriff, Joe Arpaio, in Maricopa County in Arizona. They took him out. They just took out Kim Ogg because she stepped out of line. And this was recently reported on the Daily Wire. Fox News carried a bit on it, and I just saw a lengthy article. It was the Media Resource Center, I believe, and I'm going to do a show on it because it lays out chapter and verse what they're doing. In addition to enforcing their expectations. So they list, and these prosecutors have to make a pledge to certain things. So they're not making a pledge. They're not making a pledge to the Constitution. They're making a pledge to George Soros via this organization is partly what's going on. But these folks will use their money to diminish the voice of law enforcement because they'll say, they have a marketing group that will test words that they use on the public. I mean, it's laid out in an article, and I've seen it, to diminish people like us. Our voices, they're going to say we're shrill, we're just using scare tactics. This is just law enforcement. This is just propaganda. This is the kind of stuff that they'll say. And they'll say, well, we need treatment. We need these things. And they'll couch it in a way that sounds friendly and nice, even as the body counts go up, right? So when I look at this and I look at what's happening in New York, I understand that there's a lot of money behind this progressive prosecutor movement, both in marketing the progressive prosecutor movement, even as their failures mount, but also they have a cadre of lawyers and a lot of money to file lawsuits against anybody who challenges these progressive prosecutors around the country. So I would encourage, they're right online. I would encourage folks to look at the fair and just prosecution and then look at the criticism of them, particularly the Media Resource Center, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So when I see that the NYPD and New York City does not imprison these kids, does not put them in prison and force them to use bail, it is driven by this whole progressive prosecutor movement and George Soros and these other folks. And I'm not a tinfoil hat wearing guy. I had to see the evidence before I believed it. And I'm seeing the evidence. When I first saw Kim Ogg talk about how she was primaried because she wasn't progressive enough, that got my attention because I had been following the Fair and Just Prosecution organization for years because I actually worked with Miriam Krinsky, the head of it, back in 2015 on a kind of a benign project in the sheriff's department, and she went on to lead this organization. So I'm saying there's a lot of money and a lot of pressure on the political leaders to do it the way these progressives want to do it, and they'll use the legal system. They'll denigrate your positions publicly, and they'll use whatever, and they'll use the legal system both civilly and criminally, and they'll use they'll market against you, and they'll primary you. Think about it. Harris County is a large county.
I understand what you're saying, but we're talking about right now. This is something in the wheelhouse of the politically appointed management in the NYPD. We have a 17-year-old who committed a robbery. A robbery. That is not a juvenile report by any stretch of the imagination. That is an arrest. Now, raise the age came. It's no longer an official arrest, goes to family court, whatever, but it's still an arrest. And now we have the NYPD not partaking in their core mission. So we're all just falling in line.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all just falling in line. And that's the main problem I see is that I get it. Listen, I understand. I'm only 43 and I've been blackballed out of the law enforcement community. I've served 18 years. I have zero disciplinary. I've been involved in thousands of incidents, hundreds of arrests. I was very well respected until I said, I'm not putting that in my body. I already have the antibodies for it. You yourself, your own department, told me not to put it in my body. You just told me, and now you're telling me because Bill de Blasio said I got to do it, and now Eric Adams is enforcing it. And then I became this tinfoil wearing hat when all of the things I said were proven right. It was illegal. They violated all this law. And now we're seeing, I agree with you. Listen, the pressure's there. You're not going to get the money from the left. It's all coming in. I get the pressure from the political party, but from the politically appointed, these men are at the end of their career.
Yeah,
they're in their 60s. They're in their 60s. I mean, how many years do you have left on this earth? And like the thing that we could do is sit here and say, you know what? This is in my wheelhouse. I could charge a 17-year-old for robbery, and we're not. We're brushing it over. We're saying, oh, you know what? They don't want that. And so to make my life easier, it's going to make my children's life much harder. Yeah. But to make my life easier, I'm just going to let the 17-year-old out on a robbery. I could argue with the 11-year-old, but that's coming from somebody. I was on probation at 11 for a felony criminal mischief that I didn't do. They said I was acting in concert, and I did 6 months probation for it. And I'm like, I'm seeing the dwindling of the entire criminal justice system, and us as members of the law enforcement community, we're shirking our own responsibility. And that's where I see the biggest problem. And that's like the stuff that constantly Eric's talking about too. So like this to me is a ground ball.
Chief, I speak about moral compass a lot. And like I said, I was an honor grad at Officer Candidate School in the Marine Corps. So I take pride in leadership. I think leadership is the most important thing for an organization to thrive. And it's also detriment when an organization crumbles. And that's what I say about this old white man standing up. Because I hear, like, for instance, we have the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information who's been promoted through this circle of nepotism. And we see it, but it's so far egregious right now in the New York City Police Department. And I get it. You have to tip the scales, right? That's an art when you're in the leadership. But he's also pandering to the point that he's virtual signaling. So he's lying and gaslighting to the public so that he panders to his appointed New York City mayor because it's self-serving for his own career. And it's also to the benefit of his, sometimes we say siblings, but in this case, his wife. His wife was given a position. A gig was created for his wife. Now, just based on that, we can look at the appearance of impropriety, right? And the problem that I have is that they're not standing up and speaking the truth of what's going on here. For instance, yesterday, right, you watched the podcast about Central Park. Tariq Shepard, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information, indicated to the public that these are just stubborn teens, that these illegal aliens that are 11 and 17 years old, they're just stubborn teens. That's why I was joking around. I said, John, were you a stubborn teen? Was I a stubborn teen? So that's gaslighting, and that's a complete lie to the public because these kids are a part of a large gang, Tren de Aragua, the movement from the border to what's going on in New York City. They're part of the crime spree. They're part of this manufactured, politically created crime crisis in New York City. And no one's standing up and actually saying the truth that we actually have to prosecute and arrest properly. So for an 11-year-old and a 17-year-old that commit a robbery, especially a 17-year-old, it's key that we focus in on the 17-year-old. Because prior to the legislation of this democratic progressive movement, a 16 and 17-year-old was treated as an adult in the court system. But in this particular case, in a violent robbery, not only was this child, young man, not arrested, but nothing was documented because a juvenile report is absolutely that. It's nothing. It's used for truancy purposes. It's used for follow-up for the youth officer at each local precinct to have conversations with the kid, do sometimes usually it's a circle between the kid and the school and the parents, sort of like an intervention, but it's not an actual arrest. So what that also is an indication to me, because John and I spoke about this. So if they're actually issuing a juvenile report to a 17-year-old that commits a robbery, then we have improper classification. So we're not actually documenting and reporting crimes properly because nowhere is this documented as a robbery. So exactly. So that goes to this further gaslighting where the mayor could tell the public perception versus reality. And what are your thoughts about that when it comes to manipulating crime classification?
Yeah. So he's hiding crime stats. So let me clarify. I'm not justifying I'm just saying the realities politically that's going on. I will say, just for clarity, because it's one of those progressive tropes that they throw out there that your brain's not formed enough until you're 26 years old, so we can't hold you fully responsible for the violation of the law. And here's the thing: most people don't know this. And actually, if you were under the age of majority, they had a process in California. I'm sure you had a similar process where the person had to be declared unfit. What that meant is they were unfit for juvenile court, and then they would be tried in adult court. So we had a whole legal process to look at each individual juvenile offender to ensure that they were mature enough to understand the intent that they formed to commit that crime, and then we prosecute them in adult court. So it wasn't willy-nilly that we prosecuted every kid, right? We evaluated, and then it became no, none of them will be done in adult court, and then they raised the age from 18 to 21 to 23. Now you're going to be treated differently in California until you're 26 years old, right? I will say now they even have a senior citizen discount. If you've done 25 years in California State Prison and you're over 50, they'll give you a senior citizen discount on your sentence and let you out again, right? So it's what is going on is crazy. But yeah, you're right. This also allows. That's where I have a problem with these crime stats, and these progressive prosecutors say the movement says, well, crime is actually down. Well, if people don't have faith in the criminal justice system, they stop reporting. Right. And now you got a situation where they've manufactured lower crime rates, but not even documenting the robbery report. Because what should have happened is they should have documented the robbery, right, with these three kids. And then you write in the report, we handled, what do they call it? Handled in an exceptional way via juvenile, whatever you called it, right? So it's still at least documented that a robbery occurred, right? You can still put them as parties involved in the case if you don't want to list them as suspects. And that's where I talk about there's a lot of ways where you can still do the right thing, meaning you're documenting the crime, And the other part of this, I know you're bagging on the Chiefs here, and I'll give a little. Now I won't give any cover for the Chiefs, right? But I will say this: there's a lot of guys between.
They're
the
going to be
Chiefs
tweeting your name today. They're going to be thanking you.
You're getting kicked out of your unit.
There's a lot of guys between the chief and that lieutenant, right? And so you got your bureau commander, or whatever. They're the ones making the shot on. They're the ones making the call on this, right?
They're just as guilty. We're not holding them on account.
Small unit leadership breakdown. Everyone
might
has
even
to
be more
take
guilty.
ownership.
They might even be, if they're the one putting their name on it, they're more guilty.
But they can still crank out. They could say, write a report. I'm trying to balance as we talk. Write the report that the robbery occurred. List those guys as parties, but then we're going to do an exceptional clearance and say they were handled via whatever this juvenile information form thing. Now you still got that. So there's ways to use that system to still document that the robbery occurred. But you see, as the higher you get, the pressure is on. And you saw it. This is one of my criticisms of CompStat, right? Is there was constant pressure to lower crime, and there is a point where you're just, it's a baseline. You're not going to get any lower, and I think this is where we went wrong on this stuff. We went to zero tolerance, whatever. There's only so much you can do on the policing side to keep crime low, and once you get to where you're a comfortable level, then it's other actors have to step in, and that's where your mental health folks in schools and other places. It can't, and I think the administrators, and then this is where I think we got betrayed, the politicians. They saw the success of law enforcement in this stuff, and they pressed. We did more, to the point where we went farther than I think we should have, and other agencies should have been held accountable for their part in dealing with disorder in the community, and they weren't. They just relied on the easy tool, the paramilitary tool, and that was law enforcement. Had we pulled in other actors and forced them to be as accountable as law enforcement became at the time, I think we would have continued to have some success. But the politicians just shifted, and right, they just we were the easy tool to use to get it down, and we were the easy people to blame for racism or whatever else you want to talk about. But I do think you have a whole, and this is, I had what's his name, Raphael Mangel from the Manhattan Institute on my show, and it was very interesting because it's my understanding that NYPD is trying to re-push, and we talked about some of this on our show, re-embrace some of the concepts of broken window, re-embrace some of the aggressive policing that actually gave success. But they're struggling because they have lost that generation of people who knew how to do it. And
great point. Speaking of right here,
and the trust of the officers isn't there. They don't see that the administrators can be trusted and the politicians can be trusted, and they're failing. So even academics are seeing the effort, and they're recognizing the challenges to be successful in just re-implementing some of the basic tenets of broken windows. I don't know if that answers your question. I
think that's fantastic. I think also there's a great comment here. James LaFranco, one of our supporters here, he said you can't release their names because they're juveniles. Wasn't that the case? I think that's part of the bigger picture also, right? So that, no one can anonymously provide this information to ICE because it's a sanctuary city. So I think this whole thing is part of a political theater, and it's the political arena of protecting these illegal aliens because it's a sanctuary city. So I think that's a great comment. I do think this is part of the bigger picture. And absolutely going back to what you said, Chief, you're absolutely right. I mean, arguably, John and I should still be employed by the New York City Police Department. We were both climbing the ladder. I was up to captain. I was unable to get promoted because of the civilian complaints I had received. John was climbing the ladder in his career. Arguably, we both had the tools, and we should be chiefs or even moving up to commissioners at some point. But we stood on moral principle. No longer I could do what I was paid and trained to do because of the legislation that had just completely turned into a 180. John stood on moral principle. And at this point, we found a new path expressing what's going on with the leadership. And it's sad to see, because I do believe that leaders have to tip the scales. Of course, they have to be willing to absorb some of this information and tactfully discuss it with their leadership. Absolutely that, but they have to stand on moral principle also. And this pandering and this virtual signal of just playing pretend and completely lying to the public is where I take the biggest issue, because that's exactly what it is. And you're 100% right. They want to pretend and give the impression that the New York City Police Department is doing intrusive police work and applying the theory under the blanket of broken windows. But what John and I talk about in this podcast is that they use it improperly. And when they actually go out and address quality of life concerns under broken windows, they target the wrong people. It's the woman coming home right now who's getting the summons. It's the man on the train who's drinking a beer who's coming home from work. But it's not Tren de Aragua. It's not the illegal aliens. It's not the military age males, because they'll create an obstacle for the police departments. It's easy, soft targets. And that's what we see here, unfortunately.
It's unfortunately just numbers. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you when I was the chief on transit, it's hard because you get accused of, well, you've written more tickets to people who of color, so you're racist. And and I remember explaining to him, I go, no, our process when our folks get on the train is we've trained them to go from one end of the platform to the other and check everybody. Right. Same with the train car, and we did some minor bus stuff just to suppress crime that was going on there, and we used fair enforcement. And I had to show that over and over and over again that was our process. That's what we were trained. But here's the thing about it. And I had trained, I want you to get the guy who's the evader. But if their pupils are dilated, I want you to talk to that guy because he's under the influence of methamphetamine or cocaine, right? If they're screwed down, pinpointed, then they're probably under an opiate. So we trained our guys. Yeah, I just don't want numbers. I want you to use this as the vetting tool to find criminals who are engaged in real criminals, right? And it was very effective. I mean, I said I read the book Turnaround by Bill Bratton. We'd already started implementing the broken windows theory on the trans system. We cut our crime by 30-40%. It was really a good tool, but I was under pressure that whole time. And the thing about it is as you've probably figured out, I'm a public policy nerd, so I gathered data the whole time. So when I would come under attack, I had here's how many sites we gave, here's our evasion rate, here's the crime trends going down as we do this. And so I was always ready for them, right? And, and they would say, okay, can we go behind closed doors? And the politicians behind the doors were always much more supportive than they were publicly, trust me. But the fair enforcement that's kind of just the tool to get you in contact with folks, and then you get to find the bad guys. What you're saying is your line officers are avoiding those bad guys because they want to avoid the problems that come with them. This is what I'm hearing. And that's where the leaders that's where they need the support of Eric Adams. That's where they need the support of your leadership on the NYPD. And that's actually where they need the support of the public. The public has to state clearly and unequivocally, this is what we want. And unfortunately, today, they have to state that by changing the leadership at the mayor's level and at the borough level. When they start doing that, then the NYPD will be open for change. Because I remember, it was when Giuliani came in and said, we're going to do it this way. And he had some people who wanted to do it differently, and they embraced these strategies, and it worked. But until you move, unfortunately, I'm hoping you don't have to go through the 60s and 70s again before somebody wakes up and say, this is where, the train is coming off the tracks. We got to change this, right? So, but that's where the leadership change needs to happen, which is why we need to talk about these nefarious actors that are funding these politicians and setting expectations of them when they fund them, right? That's why I think the Fair and Just Prosecution Organization is so critical, understanding what they're doing, because there's no doubt in my mind Eric Adams got money. There's no doubt in my mind Alvin Bragg got money from them. I didn't look at their financials. I looked at other people's financials, but I'm sure they're getting funding from them. And I imagine other bureau prosecutors are being influenced by this progressive prosecutor movement, and that is only going to change when the public bounces them out. And we in LA, just to let people know what's going on in LA, George Gascon is a big leader in the progressive prosecutor movement. He's the DA in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the largest local prosecutor office in the country. So he represents a crown jewel in George Soros's crown of prosecutors, right? And he's on his heels right now. I think we're going to take him out here in November, which will be a big coup. Cook County, Illinois. Your audience has got to hear this. Cook County, Illinois. Kim Foxx decided not to run and she's a Soros-funded DA. We all know her from the Jussie Smollett debacle, right? And she's done many of the same things that are going on in Philly and Los Angeles. She decided not to run, and they put in an even more progressive prosecutor and funded him. And a moderate Democrat judge stood up, Judge Eileen O'Neill Burke, to run against her, and she won by 1,500 votes. And they called her right wing. They called her everything. And she's a moderate. She's more of a lefty, but she's more of a moderate, like Kim Ogg in Harris County. And so those are two the LA will, I think we'll get rid of Gascon. They got rid of Kim Fox and her designated replacement with a more moderate. They bounced out Chesa Boudin up in San Francisco because the citizens said enough is enough. And even the mayor up there has moderated, right? They've gone, they're liberals, but they've at least gone to the center. So my message to the folks out there in New York City, you have a chance to correct this, and that chance is in November, and you need to elect the people that are going to make that change. That is the critical piece. That's what I'm seeing going around the country with this progressive prosecutor movement and the embracement of these progressive criminal justice stuff within the municipal governments, the mayors and the city councils.
All right, guys, listen, we got a lot of stuff to get through here, so let's try to bring the responses down to like 60 to 90 seconds so we can get through. I got a lot of
stuff. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. It's fine. But I want to get through the topics, or else we're going to be here for 4 hours, and I got a lot of stuff to do today. I can't do it. So we got this video comes up. Chief, we have a diaphragm law in New York City. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It says that a police officer can never put pressure intentionally or unintentionally on the back or chest or the diaphragm, and the diaphragm isn't even spelled out in New York City. Currently, what you're watching right there violates the diaphragm law. So because he is putting pressure on the parts of the diaphragm. It has been weaponized its first time. Police officers in New York City are told they are not allowed to use chokeholds in any circumstances. If you watch the beginning of this video, the officer right here is largely by himself. His partner is putting gloves on. I'm all for officer protection, but not when your partner's fighting with someone. I do believe this individual would have been brought immediately to the ground prior to any of this, if not for the diaphragm law. And you see a lot of pitter-pattering back and forth on these videos. Not this one in particular, but on a lot of them, because officers are afraid of violating it. What's your thoughts about the diaphragm law or the use of officers using chokeholds?
Okay, so we hire a lot of high school graduates, and we expect them to understand the law much deeper than any criminal defense attorneys. Now we're hiring those high school graduates, and they have to understand anatomy as well, right? I mean, this is lunacy what they're doing. Says you watch any MMA fight, what does it get them on the ground and pound? Not that we want them to pound, but it's get them on the ground so that you can control them. And we're ignoring common sense. It's absurd in my mind, absolutely absurd.
Well, you're absolutely right. And what's interesting, we have to reflect on this. So we have a friend to the podcast. He's a former police officer, retired about a year ago. He's been a target of political persecution. He's actually being sentenced in September 9th. His name is Juan Perez. He'll be sentenced for an assault. He's been convicted of assault for a 911 call that he was summoned to. He was attacked by an emotionally disturbed perpetrator. He overcame that resistance, and he has now been convicted of assault. And so I worry for these two police officers. Now, they did a good job. I think the police officer putting his gloves on, that's absolutely ridiculous at that point. Just get in the game. Honestly, I rarely ever had gloves on in my career. I understood that I was not going to get HIV with the air. I did my research on what illnesses I was exposed to. But we have to worry for these police officers. Could they face the same arm of prosecution by the 5 borough DAs of New York City right now that have this political movement of progressive movement of attacking police officers? The law is not used against the criminals again. The arm of the law has been used against police officers, and that's the problem that we see. And if Juan Perez, to me, he's the baseline now. If he could be sentenced for this 911 call that he was summoned to, what happens to these police officers? And exactly that, what John is saying, they did violate the diaphragm law. It's a stupid law, but they did violate this diaphragm law. And we've seen the arm of justice now make its inception on this chokehold ban and diaphragm law. And it opens up Pandora's box to keep going further.
Yeah, I think obviously these are the progressive movement. They keep passing these laws, these stupid laws, and where police are the targets. And as I talked about the Fair and Just Prosecution group, that's who they're targeting. They're targeting police because they have to vilify the police. They no longer want police to sit in a place of honor. You got a comment from James here. I think that I like the stick. I carried a stick. Guys don't carry batons anymore. I don't get it, but because that allowed you to reach out and touch somebody without having to put hands on right away and maybe gain some control, right? So, unfortunately, with the advent of body worn cameras, you start using a stick, then that's everything looks ugly. Well, you know what? Trying to take somebody to jail who doesn't want to go to jail ain't pretty. It's going to look ugly to everybody who's never done it before. And the public needs to understand that. Unfortunately, the voice of law enforcement has been suppressed, and we don't get to sell that message. We don't even get to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a comment on here that, oh, this is a police show, and you guys, I see a right-wing perspective. And I don't think it's a right-wing perspective. I think what you're hearing is police officers talk about ridiculous things in law enforcement. And unfortunately, the reality of life is politics is life. It controls your life. It creeps into every aspect, every aspect of your work, whether you work in a retail store, you're a police officer, you're a teacher, you're a doctor. Unfortunately, politics is over, and we see it all day long. So I think that, I think police officers tend to lean conservative because right now, how it sits in this country is conservatives are more for common sense policing, common sense legislation, and for law and order. And we're seeing chaos on the streets of heavily ran democratic cities. Would you agree with that, Chief?
That's a typical trope of law enforcement that is speaking out. They're right wingers, they're conservative. So let me make something very clear to that guy that did that. I worked with Camilla Harris on a project called Back on Track when she's AG in Los Angeles. It's wraparound services for men who are medium to high recidivate to reduce their recidivism rate. And it was a reasonably successful program. I learned a lot about it. I implemented new strategies in the LA County jail system, including drug and alcohol treatment programs that would reduce their likelihood to recidivate when they got out. Somehow, I don't think that is what you would characterize as conservative or right wing. Some people might see that as progressive, but the reason why I did it was evidence-based and common sense. That led me to work with the MacArthur Foundation to develop a diversion program in Skid Row. What that meant is you got arrested or you got a citation from LAPD. They had a mental health professional interview you when you came in the door, and it just focused on misdemeanors at first. And if you said, yes, I want treatment, you got treatment and under the auspices of the judge. If you didn't want treatment and we weren't putting them in the jail that long, and many of them just wanted to go to jail for a few days, right? You went that way as well. I was advised a couple months ago that program has been up and running for 5 years. We've had over 2,000 people through it and 90% success rate. I developed a pipeline from the LA County jail systems with the LA Mission, where people who wanted to get out and get wraparound services for 6 to 12 months so that they can reintegrate into society successfully at no cost to the county did. It was only a few people a month, but it cost us nothing, and we received success. And I actually sit on the board of the LA Mission today to help guide that organization. So if you look at my background, am I a right-wing conservative? I would think people would look at that and probably say, probably not. Probably not. That I am a person who looks at what's out there, what will likely work, how do I implement a program that can be successful, and whether it is a program based on the broken windows theory or programs reducing recidivism with evidence-based programming with key performance indicators, I'll do it. I think that indicates that I'm more of a progressive a la Teddy Roosevelt than a hardcore conservative that you reflect. And let's make something clear. Your comments are to deflect and degrade the comments that are being said in this podcast. They're not realistic. You don't know who we are. You just draw assumptions because we wore a uniform and we carried a badge.
That's one of the standpoints of the left that I take issue to. And I think just that comment alone shows the bias and prejudice on the left when it comes towards policing, the disdain for police, because anything that's actually pro-police is anti-left. They create this anti-sentiment and this anti-rhetoric when it comes to policing because just of total disdain. And it comes from a place of emptiness. And I think that it's funny. It's kind of ironic that if you're pro-police, if you're pro-America, if you walked around a neighborhood right now in America, and you saw an American flag outside someone's home with the pole swinging high, at this point in America, you could actually assume who they're voting for. And that's what's sad at this point, that if you stand for America, if you stand for public safety, if you stand for law enforcement, you stand for military, that you consider a right-winger. And I would say, is that really being a right-winger, or is just being on the right side of things? I don't find myself to be far right. I don't find myself to be far left. I find myself to be in the middle, somewhere where it's common sense. I want what's best for this country, and I want what's best for the people, because the people are the ones that made the country. It's the same thing when I was on the job. You know, guys would say, the job sucks. The job did this. The job did that. And I would say, well, who is the job? We are the job. The people are the job. And that's where I see the problem, is the people making the wrong decision and the right moves. And exactly what you just said with those comments. Those are just trolling. You know, I've been called an extremist. John's been called a right-wing extremist. We've been referred to as state brutalizers. You know, we're white. And we're saying, well, who is this angry white guy? I mean, John's Italian. I'm Jewish. I mean, but who are these angry white guys? So it really comes down to people. And, you know, what are your thoughts on that when it comes to people in comparison to the actual system?
Well, let me clarify. When you look around the country and where all these progressive policies have been in place, it's not working anywhere. And when I say I address public policy on my show, I deconstruct what they're doing and why it's not working. And then I give examples of where it's worked. Now, I just talked about some people might say progressive things that I was involved in and did. No, they weren't really progressive. They were, you know, I'm a social moderate and a fiscal conservative Republican, right? If you're going to be a fiscal conservative, then you have to actually look at good governance. And right now, we don't have good governance. You know, when crime goes up, businesses leave, hope goes down, people lose jobs. That doesn't help anybody. And why can't people see that? And when I say something like that, I get the all cops are bastards, you know, thing on my Twitter thing. I get, you know, propaganda. And I'm saying, I'm just looking at the data. You're ignoring the data because you don't want to address the truth. You're ignoring the data because your policies are based on ideology, and my argument is ideology never makes for good public policy.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan, and it's something that I agree with. There is no left or right. There's only an up or down. So
Yes.
if you're holding on to any policy because it aligns with your political ideology, you're lost. It's either the policy brings us up or it brings us down. And that's where we become lost in this country, where we can't call it out because of, well, you know, this guy's a Republican and I donated to him and I gave him money and I support him and he mostly supports all my ideas, but this policy is a complete failure. So I can't say anything because, then I'd be going against the right or and vice versa. And that's where we've come to, instead of taking issues as a whole. Like you said, the policy might be progressive, might be considered progressive, but it's actually something that works. It actually stops recidivism. It stops people from a life of drugs, right? And that's why, you know, you need the balance. And that's what we lost in the country, is we're not seeing the balance, right? You know, I always say that you can't just have all conservatives in power and you can't have all liberal thinking minds in power. You need both of those point of views, because somewhere in the middle is about where we want to be. You know, so I appreciate you bringing that up. So listen, New York City the other night, mayor has an event for Kamala Harris. It goes haywire. City's on fire. I was playing the videos while you guys were speaking. Fox News puts this article out. Chaos erupts at Kamala Harris NYC event as DNC braces for Chicago unrest. The author actually quoted me in here, and this is what I said, and I just want your thoughts on if you agree with me or if you don't. I said, what you saw the NYPD dealing with on the streets of New York in response to Democratic rally to endorse Kamala Harris is a preview of what law enforcement in Chicago will be dealing with next week at the DNC, said John McCarty, retired NYPD lieutenant, co-host of the Finest Unfiltered. Soft crime, blue policies, and policy have emboldened agitators and are looking to incite and those who are looking to incite riots during protests. And Chief, I just want to back up. When we talked about the nightstick, You know why you don't see the nightstick in the NYPD's hands anymore?
Too
Because
offensive?
it was removed. The police commissioner signed a protest settlement agreement with the Civil Liberties Union and said, yeah, my officers won't carry nightsticks unless it gets really out of hand, and then we'll deploy them.
That's lunacy, to take every tool away from you, even your hands, your you know, to grip people and put them on the ground. Okay, so Chicago, yes, I do think it's going to be a problem in Chicago. I did have a guest on my show, Florian Sunka from the Chicago Contrarian, and we talked specifically about this. He said that the Chicago PD are being taught de-escalation techniques as their primary tool for dealing with protests. And as you guys know, once you have protests there, they're motivated to commit violence for their goal, and they will. Their goal is to get everybody else involved. And if law enforcement doesn't come out forcefully against those that are likely to commit violence, it will only engender greater reaction from the crowd against whatever is going on, right? Because it's like it's the psychology of a crowd, right? If you have 100 people that are doing something, and 1,000 people see that there's no consequences, then 1,000 people feel they can join in. So you have to deal with that 100 that are committing violence. But in Chicago, they're teaching basically de-escalation techniques to Chicago PD, and just to paraphrase what he says, they're setting Chicago PD up for failure. So yes, I do think it's going to be a mess in Chicago. That's my prediction. And I think Chicago PD will, they're damned if they do, if they damned if they don't. If they do take old school action, they'll be prosecuted. So I think it's a recipe for disaster for the Democrats.
Well, my argument to these Democrat socialists that have no idea about policing, they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. They use these. So the Dunning-Kruger effect. I speak about that all the time. They speak about these de-escalation tactics, these buzzwords. And what is and they'll never tell you what are these de-escalation tactics. Now, I believe that these de-escalation tactics that are implemented, administered by the Democrats, are really tactics to soften and weaken the police department, further defunding, further abolishing of the police, and making the police officers themselves soft targets. And I say this all the time. What's the most tangible form of government? It's your law enforcement agencies, because you can touch them, you can feel them, you can hear them, you can see them. And that's how they tear down a society and tear down policy and change laws, by tearing down the police department and making them soft targets. And that's what these de-escalation tactics are, because arguably, I would say, and John says it too, we say on this podcast, that sometimes de-escalation, especially with a protest that's planned, which we know, because what's the best prediction of the future is a reflection of the past. We know that this is going to turn violent. Would be shutting it down and making arrest immediately. That would be the de-escalation. Quite contrary to what the Democrats are telling. And exactly what John just said, this protest settlement that we actually did a podcast about actually makes the police department soft targets. It doesn't de-escalate anything. It further escalates the situation for these paid agitators, and it creates more of a societal problem and just creates chaos. And we've seen it since October 8th, day in and day out in New York City, and it's just spread throughout the entire country. What are your thoughts on the police department targeting the actual people that fund these movements, the leadership of these protests, rather than just these low-hanging fruits where these arrests don't get prosecuted and they get dismissed?
Well, I think they need to start at, if they're using violence to reach political gain, that technically is the definition of terrorism. So they should be looking at them, right? But they're not, because they're civil rights organizations. And just to clarify on de-escalation, that to me that's a squishy word, because it means different things for different people, and then it just opens up the law enforcement or the command who might be dealing with a riot or a disorder for criticism, because it's not clear and concise as to what that means for officers when they have to use force. It's a squishy word. And I'll tell this story just because we had a shooting out here, all caught on camera. It involved a member of my department, goes to a domestic. Lady who called has a knife, and she says, I'm going to get him. She's framed in the doorway. He can see her, orders her out. She doesn't come out. She goes, I'm going to go get him. She approaches the person she's going to get, her boyfriend. He walks in. He's got a taser in hand. He's going to use less than lethal. She's got the guy by the arm and the knife in plunge mode and starts movement, and the deputy ends up pulling his gun and shoots her, right? All caught on tape. He arrived there, gave her commands, ordered her out. That's de-escalation. And what's the first thing why didn't you try de-escalating first? She already said she's going to get her boyfriend. She's going to stab him, right? He approaches and he sees that she's doing exactly that. How do you use de-escalation in that scenario? And yet that's their expectation. And that's why I say it's a squishy word, and it's designed, I think, to open up law enforcement to lawsuits and criticism unnecessarily, unfairly. It's not clear and concise, and so it will, like I said, open up law enforcement for failure.
It's undefined word, 100%. I put a meme out a long time ago, and what I said was de-escalation was it was like the Care Bears. Like, this is what politicians think de-escalation is. It's the Care Bear shooting these magical powers out of their chest. And then I put a picture of a Georgia state trooper ripping somebody out of the window with his firearm pointed at him after he just ran several people over. And I said, what de-escalation actually is, and everybody went nuts about it. But it's true. I've spoken to so many people, like whatever, police reform advocates, and I consistently tell me what de-escalation is. Tell me what the de-escalation is in this situation when you walk in and the guy has a knife and he's about to charge you. Tell me what the de-escalation is, and they don't want to have the conversation. They'll dance around it, so 100%. I think the bigger problem, what I brought in when we were talking about the 11-year-old, is the same type of problem we're having here, kind of what Eric brings in, because I agree with you. I think that domestic terrorism charges need to happen, not only on the boots on the ground and these issues, but as well as the people who are funding this. And that's the main part that people aren't capturing here, is that, like, this is what I think the public doesn't get, is these protests are being heavily funded by your tax dollars. They're not for profits in New York City. Are paying protesters to go out here, and then you're paying for the police to go out on the streets in New York City and fight with them. You're paying for police officers to get hurt. You're paying for all the lawsuits. All of this, what you're seeing here, is taxpayer funded and politically created. And then again, I agree with you 100%, Chief. It all comes down to politics. I don't want to just sit here and blame the rank and file or the appointed management. I want to look at it as a whole. But holistically, I look at it, just because I was in law enforcement for so long. I mean, I see these people getting arrested for assaulting cops, and they're getting disorderly conduct. And the disorderly conducts are getting the tickets. Everything that happened is getting dismissed in mass. And again, I feel like we are eating ourselves. And like, we're selling the public down the river, but we're selling our own members down the river as well. I mean, because I'll tell you right now, I don't know any of these guys. I'm sure that everybody on camera right now does not want to be there, doesn't want to be involved in arrest, and is like, I'm one incident away from going to jail. I'm one incident away. I'm one swing of the nightstick. I'm one takedown. Look at this. It's complete, utter chaos that was planned and organized to further a political event. So I think that's what the main problem we're seeing in the cities are, and the fact that we have bought in to this de-escalation word and have put it into our own policy, but don't have the training on the back end to give it.
Yeah, it's you got one of your. Joe Curry made a comment. George Soros is the funder of these. Yes and no. He's funded politicians that get put in place, and those politicians advocate for government money to go to nonprofits, and then government money, because he's given seed money, and the big money is when government starts doing it. And I think when you start looking at nonprofits, because they're saying, well, we need to find a softer approach. It doesn't all have to be the criminal justice system, law enforcement. So we need to give the nonprofits. Here's what they're not doing. They're not evaluating whether those nonprofits are actually effective at all. Protests aren't really improving public policy. They're just protests, So as you recall, under CompStat, your bureau commanders, okay, this is how many you got robberies going there. What are you doing to solve it? And they look at your strategy to make sure that you're actually doing all the right things to get it done, and then you're getting an outcome. We're not doing that with our nonprofits. The money's being given to them. They're not being held to any real, I'm going to use some words that maybe folks won't understand. When you let a contract out of government, you start with the scope of work. Here are the expectations. the expectations are loose, and they're not held to any expectations. In California, we spent billions on homelessness, for example, and now suddenly we realize, and we haven't improved it because we are giving money to nonprofits and we're not holding them accountable to what they say they're going to do. Yet these are the same ones that will do the protests, including unions, and these are the same ones that will attack law enforcement and other stuff. And any of their funding sources, they'll attack them. They don't want any of their money. Once they get the money, it's their money, whether they're successful or not. And that includes all of these nonprofits. That's where the next scan. You're going to start seeing some of these guys going down for corruption because they're going to steal as well.
Dan Romania, great comment. I agree with him. De-escalation is the brainchild of the American Marxists to emasculate the police. It's part of the reimagining police policy. I mean, we talk about emasculation of police all the time, which is actually equivalent to what I was saying before about creating an environment where the police now become the soft targets. And the police will become the soft targets on all ends. It's almost like when they use that buzzword de-escalation, it's almost like when we see some of these liberal universities where they discuss what is a woman. You ever see Matt Walsh? He talks
Yeah.
back, right? What is a woman? And they dance around the question. It's the same thing when it comes to de-escalation. What is de-escalation? That's what I've been asking. I want the definition. I want the interpretation. I want the solutions from the democratic source, from the left, to tell me what exactly is de-escalation. Because if you ask them, they won't tell you what de-escalation is.
After you get your first knockdown, drag out fight, you realize that de-escalation is the tool of choice for most cops, right? It's taught in the academy. I was taught in the 80s. This notion that somehow we didn't use de-escalation is fantasy. It's a lie, but it gets pushed to an incredible amount. But once you go to the hospital because you got a knockdown, drag out, you want to talk that guy down. You don't want to fight them. You use every single de-escalation tool in your toolbox because you don't want your uniform ripped. You don't want this. I got down on knockdown, drag out. I was in my 20s. The guy ripped my badge off my chest, bled all over me. He lost, of course. But, I had to get a new uniform. Fortunately, I wrote it on the report, and the judge made him buy me a new uniform. But you learn very quickly that you want to de-escalate because it's for your preservation as well. So this notion that we didn't use these tactics and it wasn't trained to us is a fantasy. It was always trained. We used them for from the day one in the academy, learned them and used them. But like I said, it's become squishy. What is this story I just told you about? He used de-escalation techniques, but how do you de-escalate somebody who's about to plunge a knife into somebody? How do you de-escalate that and to stop it versus using deadly force?
Well, it mirrors these protests and these violent outrage riots because the situation has already been escalated. It's almost like a planned escalated event, and at this point, they want the police officers present there as soft targets. And that's what this protest settlement is. It's a soft target for the police department, and it really leaves them handcuffed and extremely vulnerable. And it allows these protests and these violent riots to fester even further. And
so
again,
let me tell you a story. A young deputy. We had protests regarding Iran at the federal building. I think I was like 85 or 86 or whatever, and it was a mess. And we hadn't really invested. LAPD hadn't really invested in crowd control very much. And I had this old Marine sergeant, and we were sent in a squad, and I was part of the squad, and I was gas gun guy. And we assembled near local fire station, and he put us all in rank and file. We had our riot gear on. LAPD did not. And so we started marching there. Hoop, you know what I mean? Hoop, hoop. And we were probably 100 yards away, but as soon as we got in sight of the crowd and they saw us in riot gear, and they saw me in the back with the gas gun, with this big shotgun with the thing on the end, and it looked intimidating, right? Suddenly, as we got closer, the crowd quieted, and the crowd looked at us. And as we approached, the crowd backed up. Merely having those uniforms on sends a message to the crowd that there are expectations of your behavior, and we're here to enforce it, right? When you send people into a crowd without any of that equipment because it's offensive, it might incite. That's a bullshit lie. that when you say that makes a soft target, when you send a show of force and you're clear there, I want to enforce your right to protest, but your right to protest can, if it gets out of control, violate other people's rights, and I'm here to balance those rights, and I'm here to enforce that. And I'm not playing around. And that crowd, it was a reasonably friendly crowd, but it was big. It quieted down, and we had zero problems that night. And we changed how we did stuff in law enforcement. LAPD did, because they got their butts kicked in a couple of these things. But that's what they don't want. They don't want that show of force to come in and the crowd, the quiet. They want rancor. They want violence. They want people burning buildings, because that supports their notion that society has to change. And if law enforcement suppresses the 300 people there to cause violence versus the 3,000 people, or the 2,700 that are not, then it doesn't give them the picture that they want. They want their burning buildings. They say, look, they're rejecting the society, so we have to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that we always talk about. You have to have the ability to use force. If you don't have the ability to use force as a police force, you're gonna escalate. But the de-escalation is the controlled ability use of force. The guy that walked out of his police car, and sorry for you women police officers, I know there's a lot of you guys on here, AMZ or one of them, what's up? But the guy that walks out of his car and he looks like he's in shape and ready to go, that is a de-escalation.
A show of force is de-escalation. That's the point of that story.
Absolutely. 1,000%. So I asked Rock last night, please list how many New York City mayors were subpoenaed to go before a federal grand jury in a federal corruption probe. And there's only been one. So we have another first in the Eric Adams administration. There's another first. He has the first Latino police commissioner. He had the first female black police commissioner. And he's the first New York City mayor to be indicted, not to be indicted, to be subpoenaed for a federal corruption probe. He has not yet been indicted. What happens in that grand jury, he may or may not be indicted. We have yet to see. That's the original content of this space. We have close to 350 people in here. So I'm just going to ask you guys to share it out. If you're on X, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Rumble, we get some more people in here. We're going to go about another half hour. Amazon, thank you for the donations. We appreciate it. Amazon sent $9, and Crazy 107 actually sent 20. We appreciate you guys for doing that. Sitting from where you're at in LA, what are you thinking about the former NYPD captain who effected a whopping 9 arrests in his career, who largely was considered someone that never really partook in activity as it comes to being a police officer or on law enforcement? What are your thoughts around Eric Adams, around the scandals surrounding him? Like, what are you seeing from him? Would you expect more from a police officer, or are you really just not sure?
Well, I would, here's the deal. Whether he's right or left, I would expect that he wants what's best for New York City. And yes, I would think that he should have some level of understanding, at least, and to some degree, allegiance towards his old agency, because it doesn't sound like he left under a bad cloud. It sounded like he did his career. Sounds like it was a pretty charmed career if he only made nine arrests. And so he received the benefits of probably good leadership at the time, because when he was in, as I'm sure Bratton was in, and all these other, Kelly was in, and all those guys were in. So he saw leadership. So yeah, I would expect more from him. It's surprising to me, because apparently I'm a little disconnected, is that you would say that you were better off under de Blasio than Adams. That surprised me.
Well, one, I was employed. Eric was employed. Two,
okay, get it.
Two, the city of New York did not look like a third world nation.
Yeah.
Crime levels were down. Crime is up 32%. Violent crime, is up 32% since New York City Mayor Eric Adams took office. Even though national news, mainstream media will sit there and tell you crime is down in New York City, it is not. It is up 32% since Eric Adams took office. Businesses have left. He's overseen the largest amount of businesses that have left New York City ever. He has oversaw the largest amount of New York City residents that has left ever. He has oversaw the largest amount of police officers to retire early or resign ever. So when we just look at the face of it, Bill de Blasio was a devout communist who hated police. New York City was a much better place. Are we better off 4 years ago than we were now? Absolutely not. Yeah. We were way better off under the communist Bill de Blasio. And it just leads to the incompetence and honestly, what I say is intentional corruption on the part of Eric Adams. And that's why I say that. People disagree with me, but they'll never disagree with the fact that New York City was in much better shape under Bill de Blasio. And
Well,
still with the NYPD.
I think I remember, I've done research on, if you're going to be the mayor of New York, you got to have attitude, right? Because you got to lead. It's just a tough town, right? That's kind of way I think Trump is the way he is. If you're going to be a developer in New York, you got to have attitude, right? And I don't see that. When somebody's pushing on you, you need to push back and push back hard. And I don't see that you're getting that out of Eric Adams. I mean, that's what Giuliani did. I might be wrong on this, but I felt a little bit that way about Koch. But some of these other guys were there's even de Blasio was, he was ideologically driven, but he pushed back and he pushed for what he believed in, even though it was wrong. Adams seems like he's just going with the flow, and other people are in charge. And the other thing, I'm just reminded when he did finally stand up and say, "Hey, these migrants are killing us, or immigrants are killing us," they opened up an investigation on him. A la what happened to Kim Ogg in Harris County, Texas. You step out of line, we're gonna slap you down, right? How much of this is behind the scenes, and how much of this is he's just not strong enough to stand up to these guys? So first, I'm shocked that he only made 9 arrests. I mean, I think I made 9 arrests as a lieutenant, not probably more than that, because you had to. All the executives were forced to go out and patrol, right? Just as fun story. I was a commander, I think, and I said, I'm going out by myself. I don't need a partner. And I go, 20 minutes later, I had somebody in my backseat. And of course, I didn't know how to do the paperwork anymore. So they came to give me a hand. But, there are guys who work the streets. They know how to work the streets. And I never forgot that. Of course, part of the reason I did it is I wanted my guys to know that I know how to work the streets still, right? He was a meth hype out there that was causing problems. But yeah, I think Adams needs to stand up. He ran for mayor. He needs to demonstrate leadership, even at cost to himself personally.
Well, we don't see that. I mean, at this point, and that's arguably why Mayor Bill de Blasio was a better era than, of course, under Mayor Eric Adams at the behest with this leadership here. Now, listen, we're not saying that we would vote for Bill de Blasio, but we're saying that's how bad it is. I believe that Mayor Bill de Blasio, the former mayor, took it to the 5-yard line. But when Mayor Eric Adams took office, he took it to the touchdown. And that's what I think is problematic, because he was a captain. He has his experience. He understands law enforcement. But his career was meant by divisiveness. He was a rebel rouser. He was anti-police while he was part of the police department. He created 100 blacks in law enforcement. Dan Romania makes a great comment here. Chief, he was a buffoon. He hid his whole career. He hated his fellow police officers and his police department. He found a racial organization, which he called his department racist. He also sided with the perps, which is quite interesting, because we see different, he's almost like a chameleon, different forms of Mayor Eric Adams. We see Captain Eric Adams had a standpoint. He was against stop, question, and possibly frisk as a member of the police department, even in leadership. But Eric Adams also sometimes pushes and administers the broken windows, intrusive police work, because he knows that's what works. But unfortunately, the police officers, the boots on the ground, have their own targets, and they hit the soft targets because of the liability that they face right now. So I don't totally blame them. I do blame the leadership. And again, what we realize the further that we get into this podcast is that the mayor himself is actually a police commissioner of the police department, and that his leadership is failing the rank and file, and it's ultimately failing the public as well, because he is the de facto police commissioner, no matter what. And that's, unfortunately, that's what we see, is how important politics affects policing. And that's why I say politics at this point has infected policing. And unfortunately, that's the point that we've gotten at this country, that we actually have to focus on politics, and our law enforcement officers have to take part in politics and realize who they vote for also, because it will change the trajectory of how they police and how they can actually maintain a safe society for the community, and actually have an illustrious and career that's not just self-serving, that actually means something, and it's actually serving the public, not serving themselves.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Did your union support Adams when he ran? Because
they did. Yeah. But we don't really have unions. They're more of endowment associations. They honestly do not support the rank and file whatsoever. And if you actually look at the people that voted to defund the police, they heavily donated to them. That is why they hate this podcast because we exposed the fact that they donated to these left-wing candidates that were anti-police, that passed every piece of legislation that any common sense police officer or any supporter of common sense or public safety wouldn't support. They're very self-serving. I haven't seen them. We have a guy on the chat right now, Marlon Bethel, 16-year intel detective, black man, immigrant, was fired from the New York City Police Department because he wouldn't he wouldn't allow Eric Adams to Harvey Weinstein him and say, put this in your body if you want to work. So Marlon's on there, and what is his endowment association doing? Are they talking about that we need to get Marlon back to work? No, they pretend Marlon doesn't exist. They pretend Marlon's not a person. So they're not, so we don't really actually have unions in New York City. We have, I like to call them mayoral liaisons for each union.
Well, so I was on our union. So here I did all these things in my life. I represented our executives, and I got interested in, because we were funding a lot of Democrats, not necessarily all of them. They weren't necessarily all leftists, but some of them were, and I was surprised. And I started asking the questions: why are we doing this? And of course, I was just one vote, and we did support the person who benefited us. And here's what most of the people: the unions are mostly Democratic; they support Democrats, and unions generally fight. Their primary concern is bread and butter issues, and that's what they fight for. Unfortunately, the pact that they make is then you have to go along with all these foolish reform things that we do. And I think the unions need to wake up. So it's because you're cutting off your nose to spite your face in this thing. You can find moderate candidates or moderate people and support them that are going to support your bread and butter issues. Because here's the thing. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a raise, but I'm going to fire 20 extra guys a year or whatever it is. It's a bread and butter issue both ways. Here's one of the other things that I notice is they start chipping away at the benefits that law enforcement get on the backside, right? So I think unions need to face the reality. They can't continue just to fund the Democratic candidates, particularly progressive Democratic candidates, because they're working against themselves. They have to build bridges with moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, and start supporting people who are going to support a positive vision and what's in the best interest of NYPD overall. They have to break the chains to the Democratic Party.
Right, but unfortunately, what we see with the unions is they're in bed with the Democratic Party.
They are.
Exactly. I mean, that's the problem. They're in bed with the enemy, and yet they fund them also. And the message that's given to the rank and file, the message that's given to the police officers, especially from the police benevolent associations, that we have to fund these Democrats so that we could actually pass some bills. And it's ironic they gave Kathy Hochul money, and bills that they actually proposed didn't even get passed. So it was a waste of money because it's right, John? You're laughing because it's so true, but it's
true. They said we had to do it. They put out a whole email on why they had to do it and all these bills. And you know what she did when they passed through a super majority, Democrat majority in the Assembly and the Senate? She vetoed all of them. So I'm like, oh, you backdoored money to her. You didn't they didn't even tell the rank and file about it either. They just backdoored, gave her money, and then we exposed it, and then we were the bad guys, and they started running a smear campaign against us.
Well, the thing about it, I just did some research. I was looking into, for the show I got coming up, and the Service Employees Unions, SEIU, they gave a big money to George Gascon when he ran, but they also gave a big money to the PACT who fought against Jackie Lacey. She's a moderate black DA here. She was great. She was Democrat. And they gave to an organization that went at one protester. They showed up at her house at 6 a.m, but also funded phone banks against her and those kinds of things. And now look at where we're at. Look at where we're at. Crime is going up. Overdose deaths are going up. And some of these are their kids, their family members that are suffering. And yet they feel like they have to vote lockstep behind what the Democrats and the left is saying. And yet it is their communities that are being destroyed, and it's being destroyed by these policies. That's why these unions need to wake up. What good is it to get a good salary if you can't live in the city because it's unlivable? What good is that? What good is it if you live in the suburbs but you got to drive through a war zone to get to work? What good? Don't you have any pride in what you're doing? Why would you fund these people that are destroying your city simply because they're going to give you a 3% raise versus a 2% raise?
That's why we laugh, because the union trustees, the union members, the ones that are actually on the board, not the delegates in the precinct, but the union board themselves, they're eating like fat rats. They're eating good. Their lives are great. They're in an office. They're not doing actual work. Because John and I say it all the time. We say, listen, you really care? Go ahead. Go strap on a uniform. Go out and do patrol. And then what? And that's when we hear silence. Because it's self-serving. The unions are living great. They don't care. They're getting the police officer on the street has to wear a body camera, and they got a 2%. The union guy's not wearing the body camera.
I think all politicians have to wear body cameras when we're doing city business, right? That would be fun to see what comes up there.
Oh my God.
We got 10 minutes left, right? But I just want to get into this real quick. This comes out from the Las Vegas Protection Association. I guess they a little bit like sounds like an endowment association. But they put this at the NFL wants police officers working their games to surrender their biometrics, facial imaging, fingerprints, email, home address, phone numbers, next of kin, IP address, device type. The only thing they're missing there is where your children go to school. I would never submit to this. I would tell the NFL to go F themselves. And if my department assigned me there and told me that I had to do it, I would say absolutely not. They want to share this data with their NFL family. So partners across the sea, foreign governments, things of that nature. Chief, do you think this is something that police officers should do, or should there be a huge push right now to remove police officers from the NFL games?
This is where the chief of police needs to set up with a no-brainer. This isn't even a mayor issue. This is the chief saying, "Hey, I'm not going to have any of my officers provide this. Officers are being targeted. This is unreasonable what you're asking. I guess we can't work your games." And just say it just like that, and do it very publicly. Don't do it privately. You do a press conference, say this is outrageous. We're not going to do this. And guess what? The NFL will fold.
That's why that's why I have an extreme amount of respect for you. I just met you, Chief. We did your show, and you're doing exactly what I've been asking the chiefs to do in a leadership position. Sometimes I get, for instance, not to pick on him, but it's just a reality. Chief of Patrol, his name is John Shell, and his ideology is use this tough guy talk. We're going to go get the bad guys. We're going to chase them down. But it's not the man with the muscles. It's not the tough guy talk that gets respected. It's the one that's stoic and professional. And what you just said is exactly that. Stoic and professional, but you're saying it public. You're using tactics, and that's how you get the mission done. And that's why I respect what you're saying, because I believe that you speak from credibility, and I believe that you're a man of morality and moral principle. And that's exactly what I've been asking. That's a point of leadership. You're actually standing up for moral principle, for what makes sense. You're saying it publicly using tact, and you at the same time you're remaining stoic and professional, and you're not destroying the image of the law enforcement agency and the police department itself. That's tact. That's something that you learned in the military. I mean, did you have military service?
That was Plan B for me. Plan A worked out, so no military.
Well, but that's something that needs to be taught. And that's why I always say it's not necessarily a born skill. For some, there's outliers, but leadership is a learned skill and something that needs to be taught. And remaining stoic and professional, that is the key to leadership right there.
Thank you.
Listen, Mickey Murphy, he wants to know if we want to go out drinking wine, eating cheese, and catching some rays. Thumb cuffs are optional. I'm down, Mickey. Let's do it. All right.
Count me in. Listen.
Chief,
John Shelton come. I'll buy them a drink, though.
Chief, we're honored that you came on here. We were honored to be on your show. Could you tell everybody where we could find you, your social media handles? Tell us about your shows, where we could catch them, and where we could learn more and contact you.
Well, on X, I'm at LASD Jordan. That's Lincoln, Adam, Sam, David, Jordan, at LASD Jordan. And I post fairly regularly and about a wide variety of issues. You can also find me at KGRA's Briefing with the Chief on Rumble every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you can't watch the show, you can listen to it live by downloading the KGRADB.com app and listen to the radio show. And if the podcast goes behind a paywall after 4 or 5 days, but you can always go to KGRADB.com, Briefing with the Chief, and you'll find all the audio versions of my show. And next week's show, I'm going to do elder abuse. I just some of the shows I got lined up. I got elder abuse lined up. I'm talking about the recalls in Oakland. So that is Pamela Price and the mayor up there. They're recalling both of them. And I'm going to do a show on the fair and just prosecutions. I'm doing my research on that. That one, I'll just be my guest and I'll lay it all out. And one of the great ones, I'm doing charitable bail funds. The Kamala Harris supported charitable bail fund. I have somebody who's coming from the surety agency, the insurance agencies that do this. He's going to come on my show, and we're going to talk about the history of charitable bond funds and things like that. So I dive deep into the public policy so people can be well versed in what's going on. But that's 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJADB.com on Wednesdays.
Chief, can you answer this question? So Ron Layson, he's making a comment right now. He's actually he was one of my direct bosses when I was working in housing the South Bronx in the New York City Police Department. He's recently retired. He was in the executive ranks of the New York City Police Department, and he asked, question for the chief: were you able to speak out while active?
When I was the chief of transit, I had more freedom to speak out. I was actually a lower rank than a chief of commander, but I had the honorary title of chief, and so I had to speak out for what was going on in the LA Metro separately from the sheriff's department. So I had more latitude there. When you are working for an elected official, and sheriffs are all elected, you have to couch what you have to say. Generally, you have a pretty good flavor where the sheriff's at, and you're going to be able to speak up to a community. Like you can say, yeah, we need to be tougher, and this is what we're going to go do. I will say my last boss was a progressive masquerading as a moderate, leaning to conservative because he was losing. So I had to be guarded on what he said. He said he's a Democrat and we got to take out all the Republicans, and I was a Republican in his senior rank, so I had to be really careful. But the one thing about him is he let the chiefs do their job, and I appreciated that, and I did my job. I spoke to city managers, I ran around town, I talked publicly to folks, and I never got a guidelines for what I could or couldn't say. But you had to be. You have to be a little bit reasonable. But he was, during the rise of George Floyd, I got to give the guy kudos. We did our job. They showed up. We showed up. They went to jail. And our areas did not get sacked and burned. And so he may have been progressive, but he did believe in good police work. And so we had enough commonality that I felt free enough that I could speak.
Chief, one more question from Dan Rumia. Chief, how do you feel about Kamala Harris and her campaign using the police in her campaign ads, as she's pro-police and a crime fighter?
She wasn't, and so let me clarify, since this is and mostly a New York audience. So when Prop 47 passed, you had a bunch of people support Prop 47. George Gascon wrote it. George Soros funded it. The ACLU from New York helped fund it. $7 million. I checked their finances. It's outrageous. Why is New York bothering with California? But they funded it, right? And Kamala Harris was the Attorney General at the time, and one of her ministerial duties is to evaluate initiatives, because it was an initiative, and then give it a title and give it and just do a summary for the ballot, right? And so what she said is it was the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Act, and it was anything but, and they knew it. They knew it would increase crime, but she called it the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Act, and it would save money and crime would go down. Basically, that's what she said. So when I say Kamala Harris did not do the right thing, at the time she said, this is a problem. This is going to increase crime. If you want to pass it, we're going to go through a period of pain before it gets better, if it ever gets better. So she lied to Californians about that initiative. She was not supportive of doing the right thing for the people. In terms of her support for the police, I worked with her, I met her. I actually worked on a project with her, but it was, like I said, an anti-recidivism program. I heard that she asked a question about me later, so kind of an ominous question. So who is that guy kind of thing? So yes, I did speak up, and I go, well, hopefully this won't be too bad for me. But
who's that mean white guy?
Yeah, I don't, I was their guy who could implement shit, so I was around for a reason. But I don't see her as being pro-police, because, hey, listen, all of these politicians, once George Floyd happened, even before that Mike Brown happened, every time there was a campaign event, guess what? There were no cops behind them. If you look at leading up to that, always a cop on the stage at a press conference. After George Floyd, no cops, firemen and nurses and teachers behind them, right? Now crime is going up, and Kamala Harris wants to look like she's moderate. So what has she got? Cops behind her again. Don't fall for that. That's a lie. She's a progressive. And no, I don't think she is pro-police.
Hey, Chief, I tell you, it's been a pleasure, man. You are intelligent, stoic professional. Exactly what I've been asking for from the executive ranks of the New York City Police Department. It's been a pleasure to have you. Absolutely.
Guys, but before we get out of here, I just want to let the audience and Chief and Eric and all of you, Joe Lanou hit me up. He holds night. He does it Monday through Friday. I believe he does it. He starts at 9 p.m. at night, Eastern time, right? So 9 p.m. Eastern time, Joe Lanou, he's a former police officer in Texas. He hosts these space, Night Court, and he goes on issues. So this Monday coming, the 19th, yes, Monday, August 19th at 9 p.m., he's holding a space about the documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis. We were supposed to have Liz Collins on this show. It's my fault that we didn't because I've never contacted her back. But we will at some point. But I think anybody on here, especially you two, like I think we all need to go on to that space and listen to that. Ron, definitely, you guys got to join us. Amazon and definitely come, on that X space. I think that'll be interesting to hear from the producer of that film and to really go into the fall in Minneapolis. And I do want to kind of do some type of watch party one day on this show about it. So,
well, absolutely. Yeah. He reached out to me also. We were supposed to do that panel last week. Also, there's a live panel on Fridays. And definitely, I said that's something I wouldn't miss. I mean, I've been quite busy lately, but I said that's an X space I wouldn't miss. Chief Patrick Jordan, I hope you're there. Of course, Ron Layson and most of our viewers here at Amazon. Marlon, that's a great space for all of us to weigh in on, especially, that's the highlight of this country right now, the climate change for policing. So with that being said, Chief, it's been nothing but a pleasure. Thank you for being so professional. Thank you for coming on this podcast. And you know what? We got to vote better. Start voting for people that support law enforcement. Speaking of support, people that support law enforcement, our friend Tom Sullivan. Vote Tom Sullivan, State Assembly.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chief. Just hang out a minute. Tom Sullivan is the Republican, Conservative, and Common Sense Party candidate for New York State Assembly District 23. Tom is a financial professional who served simultaneously in the United States Army Reserve for 30 years and has now retired. His district covers Ozone Park, Lindenwold, Howard Beach, Broad Channel, and the Rockaway Peninsula.
Come November, I would empower our law enforcement agencies to go out there and do their job and not put them or their families or their pensions at risk for doing their jobs. We need drastic change in Albany so that we have a say in this matter, and they realize people of New York State will hold them accountable.
The Sullivan family has a legacy of service. Tom served for 30 years protecting and defending the rights of others. Come this November, he has earned your support. This advertisement's paid for by the Friends of Tom Sullivan.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime, but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?
Law enforcement professionals dedicate their lives to serving and protecting our community. But who's protecting their financial futures? That's where Laidlaw Blue comes in. Our wealth management platform is specifically designed for the law enforcement community. Laidlaw Blue is a division within Laidlaw Wealth Management, run by retired New York City detective John McDermott. His status as a retired detective uniquely positions him to establish a deep connection between Laidlaw Blue and the law enforcement community. Our platform is easy to use and provides a range of financial services, including investment management, retirement planning, and insurance solutions. With Laidlaw Blue, you can secure your financial future and provide for your loved ones. Our team of experienced financial advisors understands the unique challenges and opportunities that law enforcement professionals face. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of financial planning and achieve your goals. Laidlaw Blue. Secure your financial future today. Book a meeting using the QR code displayed or call us directly on 888 901 blue. That's 888 901 blue.